to LeEdFollow, where today we're going to be doing something slightly different to our usual thing, but the LeEdFollow channel is a pretty open platform for loads of different things. You know, we do track days, we do engine tuning, we do road trip adventures, we do project cars, lots of different things. And some people have asked me, can I get a little bit more information on hybrids? I said, are you crazy? You want to hear about hybrids? Well, it kind of makes sense, because in today's world, people want a good daily car. It's not going to cost them too much to run, but then they save the money so they can spend it on their crazy track car at the weekend. So I'm back in the hybrid Corolla, and we're going to discuss my top 8 things that I think every hybrid owner should know. Or perhaps those people that are thinking about hybrids, they should know these things going into buying one. In particular, I'm going to be talking about Toyota hybrids. Other hybrids from other manufacturers work in a similar way, but they do differ slightly. So the first up is the 12-volt battery under the bonnet. Like any conventional petrol or diesel powered car, you still have a 12-volt battery under the bonnet. Why do you have one of those on a hybrid? Well, all of the dash electrics, headlights, wipers, stereo, they are still operating on a 12-volt system, just like any conventional car. The big battery in the back for the hybrid system is only used for the electric motor. So Toyota put a 12-volt battery under the bonnet still for those reasons, but it is not used to start the engine. Hybrids do not have starter motors or alternators. The actual petrol engine is started by the electric motor, and you have an inverter which steps down the power from the big hybrid battery to recharge the 12-volt battery. Simple. Which rather conveniently brings me on to the second point, is that 12-volt battery can go flat. I've actually done it twice myself. If you put the car on ignition, like any conventional petrol or diesel car, but you don't actually start the engine, if you then run something like a tyre pump or a 12-volt interior hoover, you can very quickly drain down that 12-volt battery. So it's very important that you always put a hybrid into drive mode, so that the actual big battery for the hybrid system is monitoring and keeping the little 12-volt battery topped up. So what happens if that battery does go flat? As I said, I've done it twice myself. Well, you are in a bit of a sticky situation at that point, because what will happen is you'll go to start the car and it will not go into drive. It will actually complain about a parking brake error. The reason it complains about a parking brake error is that the electric handbrake is also powered off the 12-volt system, but because the 12-volt battery is now flat or low charged, there isn't enough juice to actually release the parking brake. Without the parking brake released, the hybrid motor does not engage and you can't actually go anywhere. So what do? Well, you can't jump start a hybrid. You can't just put another battery or a jumper pack on it, because that is going to damage all of the sensitive hybrid electrical system. And you can't put a trickle charger on it either, because the battery needs to be totally disconnected from the vehicle in order for you to do that. That's what Toyota say. So what do you do if you're in that situation where your 12-volt battery has gone flat? Well, there is only one thing you can do. You're going to have to pop them on it. You're going to have to disconnect the battery and take it away from the car. So you'll have to take it in the garage and put it on a trickle charger. So I've had to do that twice myself, and because of that, I would recommend that every hybrid owner buys themselves a trickle charger if they don't already own one, because in that situation, the only other thing I could have done was to call my breakdown provider and have them come out and recharge that battery off the car for me, which would have been very time consuming. It's a very low priority breakdown, so they would have made sure that they dealt with all of the people stuck at the side of the road, all those with children first, before they considered coming out to help Muggins here, who has made his hybrid Toyota go flat on his own driveway. So number 3 is a maintenance item that not many hybrid owners know about, because they don't read the instruction manual. But there are actually some breather vents for the hybrid battery, which sits under the rear seats. Now these are either side on most models, and sometimes they have little covers where you can undo a screw and you can take out a foam filter. If those exist on your hybrid, it's a good idea to do them at least once a year. Literally just take them out, get a hoover in there to remove any dust, put the filter back in, and you're on your way. That will allow the battery to breathe, And the hotter the battery gets, the less efficient it becomes, and also you're shortening the life of the battery itself. So the next thing I want to talk about is the eco mode. Now, most Toyota hybrids, they come with a driving switch which allows you to put them between power mode, normal mode, or eco mode. Now, power mode, pretty self-explanatory. It runs the petrol engine and the electric engine at the same time. Not sure why you would want to do that. Maybe if you're going to have a very, very, very steep hill or something. Normal mode is, as the name suggests, the normal position for the switch, and it's what most people would drive in. But if you're very much on the mission to save the polar bear, you might consider putting your hybrid into eco mode. What that essentially does is it really dials back the sensitivity of the throttle pedal, so you have to push it a lot further to get the same results as normal mode. This promotes you to drive in a very throttle light behavior, so you're going to pull away from junctions and traffic lights much slower than normal mode, but in turn you're going to get much better fuel economy, use less CO2s. Now, the problem with eco mode is it does make the car feel very, very slow and very unresponsive. Now, in my opinion, I don't think that the eco mode is worth using over normal mode. I've tried both. Yes, eco mode gives you slightly better miles per gallon, but it's not enough to warrant the car basically being ruined by putting it in eco mode. It's so bloody slow. My tip instead would actually be leave it in normal mode, but when you're pulling away from traffic lights and junctions, quickly dab the EV mode button. What that does is it forces the car to drive in electric only mode, but you are limited to a top speed of 20-ish miles per hour. What that means is that you can actually pull away from the junctions knowing that the petrol engine is not going to cut in, you're using full electric power, and then when you get to 20, the EV mode disengages with a beep, and then you go back into normal driving mode. That gives you the best of both worlds. You're not struggling with the EV mode, pulling back the power, making the car slow and sluggish, but at the same time you're forcing the car to use the electric battery and motor as much as possible. Now, this brings me on to the next point, is hypermiling. Now, you might have heard this term if you've ever Googled how to drive an electric car or a hybrid, but essentially hypermiling is adjusting your driving style in a way that you get maximum efficiency, maximum miles per gallon. Now, there are basically three core principles to hypermiling. Is number one, you want to stay off the petrol engine as much as possible. Number two, you want to touch the brakes as little as possible. And number three, you want to get free regen as much as possible. So let's start with number one, keeping off the petrol engine as much as possible. So for example, right now I'm on a pretty flat road, not going that fast, so this will be an ideal opportunity for me to back off the throttle and try to go for as long as possible on just the electric. But of course, as soon as I get to the first upward hill, the electric motor is going to struggle and the computer will trigger the petrol engine to cut back in so that it has enough power to go up the hill. So right now I'm going through the small town of Watlington. Now, I'm driving very lightly on the throttle so that the petrol engine doesn't engage. If I keep the throttle nice and light, even on normal mode, I can basically drive it in just electric mode. Maximum miles per gallon, 0 emissions. Now, I accelerated very gently out of Watlington. Petrol engine didn't come on once. I'm in normal mode, but because I was very light on the throttle, I managed to pull away and get up to 40 miles an hour without the petrol engine coming on. So moving on to the next thing about reducing your use of the brakes. Now, I'm not saying don't use the brakes, of course not. You know, you're gonna need to use the brakes to drive, to stop, to avoid killing yourself. But think of it this way, every time you touch the accelerator, you're adding momentum to the car, and you're gonna need to use either some electricity or some petrol to do that. When you go on the brakes, you're essentially throwing all of that momentum out of the window. You're basically scrubbing it off. So, good example, you're coming up to a car at a set of traffic lights, and rather than going a couple of meters behind the car and then pressing the brakes at the last minute, i.e. scrubbing off all of your momentum, just come off of the throttle and slowly coast up behind the other vehicle. That way you're not touching the brakes, you're still using all of that momentum that you've charged up by using the throttle earlier on in the drive. And that is one of the core principles of hypermiling. Now when it comes to corners, the same principle applies. If you go barreling into a corner, stamping on the brakes, then taking the corner, then accelerating back out of it, you're throwing away all of your momentum, and you're basically burning your money, as you've just thrown away all the petrol you just burned in order to get up that speed in the first place. So the smart way of taking corners, and the hypermiling way of taking corners, that before you get to the corner, you've already come off the throttle and you've reduced your speed naturally. That way you don't have to touch the brakes, and then when you're through the corner, you can gently apply the throttle again, trying to stay off of that petrol engine just on the electric. And basically, smooth is efficient. If you're constantly touching the brakes and you're constantly pressing the throttle enough that the petrol engine kicks back out, then there is room for improvement. Now let's get on to regen. Now let's assume we've just come up to a big hill, like we've just done now, and now we're going down the other side of the hill. Now I'm keeping my foot lightly on the brake, and what you'll see is the charge bar is filling up, which means I'm getting maximum regen. Now I don't want to be pressing the brake too much, otherwise the actual brakes will engage. But what we're doing is we're getting maximum charge from gravity as we're going down the hill. We're not using any petrol, we're not using any electricity, we're gaining regen as we're going down the hill. So now that I'm on a flat piece of road, all of that free electricity I gained from going down that hill, I can now use to go as far as I can without the petrol engine engaging. And that is the secret of hypermiling. You just want to go for as long as possible without the petrol engine engaging and without actually starting to use any fuel. So the next thing I want to talk about is heat pumps, or rather the lack of heat pumps in a hybrid. Let me explain. So on a conventional diesel or petrol car, you have obviously the engine, and the engine is connected to a heater matrix, and essentially the blower will blow air through the heater matrix, taking the heat from the running engine. That's how you get a nice toasty cabin in the winter. Now on an electric car, of course, you don't have an engine, so there's no heat source. So how do you get the heaters to work? Well, you have a heat pump, and a heat pump is basically an air conditioning system that runs backwards, in the way that an air conditioning system will have a hot side and a cold side, and the blower will blow air over the cold side. That's how you get nice cold air. Well, heat pump's exactly the opposite. You have a hot side and a cold side, and it blows air over the hot side instead. That's how you get a toasty interior. Now on a hybrid, you don't traditionally have a heat pump. It works like a conventional petrol or diesel engine. You still have a heater matrix, and therefore what I'm getting at is that when you're in a hybrid and you start it up from cold in the winter, the petrol or diesel engine will turn on. The reason for that is it needs to warm up so that you can then blow the hot air out of the vents. That's obviously using petrol, and there must be a hypermiling way of avoiding that. Well, there is. So it's actually quite a warm day today, so I can't show you defrosting in action, but let's just imagine the situation. So it's a frosty day and you're going to try to thaw out the car, but you don't want to use any petrol if you can help it. Right, well, assuming you have a fully charged battery from the previous day, you can just put the ignition on and you can get the blower going with it aimed at the windscreen. You don't have to have any heat, you can have this all the way down the bottom, but just the air flowing around the interior coupled with your own body heat will be enough to defrost the windscreen. What you can do also is put the AC on, which sounds like it's back to front and counterproductive, but the air conditioner will actually remove moisture from the air, which will help to defrost the windscreen. Now when it comes to heating up yourself, try to wear some layers, but you can actually use the heated seats to warm up your chair. This is again running off the battery, just like the blower and the AC, and that's a much more effective way of defrosting your car than starting up the engine and using petrol sitting there waiting for it to thaw out. Of course, once you've set off on your journey, any electricity that you used by thawing up the car should get recharged very quickly. Now we all know that if you drive along with your windows down or with the air conditioning on unnecessarily, that is a great recipe for throwing a lot of your fuel economy away. But there are things you can do to really maximise fuel economy other than the hypermiling stuff. Now one of the things you can do is when you're speccing your car, go for a model that has the smallest possible wheels and tyre package. Now because the wheels are so small, you get a lot less unsprung weight. Unsprung weight means that the engine has to work a lot less hard in order to move the car along. That turns into miles per gallon. 5 miles per gallon, in fact, over the more expensive Corolla models that have 18, 19-inch wheel options. The other thing is, by having smaller wheels, you get bigger tyres. Bigger tyres means that you have a much more comfortable ride, and this drives so much better than those more expensive models that have the bigger wheels on them. Now, some people may say, well, on those more expensive models with the 18, 19-inch wheels, those are going to have much smaller tyre walls. They're probably going to be able to out-corner your Corolla on the 16-inch wheels. And I would say, yes, you're probably quite right. However, this is not a track day car. Pretty much the whole purpose of this car is practicality and fuel economy. So I will take fuel economy and comfort over road holding any day of the week. If I want to do corners fast, I got the GT86 for that. So the last thing I want to talk about today is winter tyres, and I know that's not something specific to hybrids. Of course, you could put winter tyres onto an EV or a conventional petrol or diesel car, but the reason I wanted to mention it is because these cars come out the factory with summer tyres, and when it comes to the winter, those summer tyres become very hard, they're not very efficient, you lose a lot of the grip, and technically you can make a hybrid a lot more dangerous through a corner because of the reduced grip. Now, you could put winter tyres on, which is what I've got here. I've got a second set of alloys, exactly the same as the ones that came on the car, but I have my second set of winter tyres fitted to them, and every winter I just jack up the car and I change the wheels over. Now, those winter tyres are softer and more grippy, which means that it does affect your fuel economy. However, I think it's a very good trade-off to have that extra little bit of grip so that you can corner a lot safer if it's icy or snowy. Something else to take into account is that all of these Toyota hybrids tend to come with tyre pressure sensors. Now, on these winter wheels and tyres that I've got, I don't have pressure sensors, but it's not the end of the world. All it means is that I get an orange light which just says the system can't talk to the pressure sensors. That's it. And that is the end of my top 8 things that every Toyota hybrid owner should know about their cars. I wasn't actually going to do another video on hybrids after the last one. However, a couple of people messaged me in the comment section on videos asking various questions about hybrids, and I thought probably the easiest way to answer all those questions would be to do a follow-up video of the top tips that I've got for them. Now, I hope that was useful for anybody at home who owns a hybrid Toyota. Even if it's not a Toyota, if it's a hybrid Kia, Hyundai, all the others, hopefully a lot of the principles I talked about here today will still apply to your vehicles. And even if you don't have a hybrid, if you're maybe thinking about buying one in the future as your new daily drive, then hopefully the things I discussed about today will be of use to you. And the most important thing is, by driving cars like these, we're going to be saving ourselves money, which can go towards the cool stuff like track days and track cars. So thanks again for watching. Take care of yourselves. See you next time. Bye for now.